Welcome to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. It's 2026 and a very happy new year to Planet Normal listeners. Co-pilot Pearson and I are taking a Yuletide break. Whilst she ventures down under, throwing another shrimp on the barbie, I'm currently in the US visiting family and friends. We'll be back on Thursday the 22nd of January in the cockpit of the Rocket of Right Thinking. But in the meantime, over the next few weeks, we're bringing you some best of interviews from 2025. Some of the stowaways who've joined us on the flying refuge of reasoned views. Now, back in November, Alison spoke to award-winning journalist, foreign correspondent and author Jake Wallis Simons. Until recently, Jake's been the popular editor of the Jewish Chronicle. He's now a columnist for the Daily Telegraph and does a podcast called The Brink with defence analyst Andrew Fox. Following on from his 2023 book, Israeli Phobia, Alison spoke to Jake in November about his latest work, Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews in Itself, as well as the then unfolding scandal of the BBC's Panorama programme, splicing Donald Trump's January the 6th speech. Alison started by asking Jake if Michael Prescott's leaked BBC review into the incident highlighted some of the biases at the BBC, especially when it comes to coverage of Israel and Gaza.
He did. I mean, it's been a weird thing because the BBC seem almost to be using their monstrous failure with regard to splicing that Trump tape together to as a smokescreen for hiding once again the rampant Israelophobia, which seems to run through not just BBC Arabic, although it's absolutely appalling. I mean, BBC Arabic, some of the things they're guilty of include not criticising Hamas and not covering the suffering of Israelis. I mean, it's just that, talk about Hamas mouthpiece, BBC Arabic has become that. But also through Newsnight and others, example after example of them spreading known lies after they've been exposed as lies about Israel. And this stuff has been going on not just since October the 7th, but for decades, growing and growing with each passing year. And so the BBC seems to be employing a tactic of let's focus everybody on the Trump thing, apologise for that, and then business as usual when it comes to Israel.
Yes, since the massacre of October the 7th, 2023, as you say, Jake, we've seen the BBC refusing to call Hamas terrorists, or, they're doing a pretty good impersonation of terrorists, aren't they? And the BBC Daily quotes statistics from my favourite source, the Gaza Health Ministry,
yes,
as if they were the gospel truth. There have been numerous incidents. Of course, one thinks of a missile landing on a hospital in Gaza, which Jeremy Bowen, the Middle East editor, was quick to attribute to the IDF. And when it was pointed out that it was a Hamas missile, didn't seem minded to apologise. And also a documentary narrated by a young Gazan boy who turned out coincidentally to be the son of a Hamas minister. Is the BBC institutionally anti-Semitic, Jake? And how would you account for these numerous really instances of grossly unethical broadcasting?
Well, I think, like you and like most people, we have a sort of residual instinctive fondness for the BBC, the BBC of our childhood, which you've written about in your columns recently. And you and I have both done some work for the BBC. I appeared a lot from our own correspondent, for example, and have presented a lot of documentaries for Radio 4, for the World Service. And they are extremely professional. The polish you get at the BBC, the attention to detail is second to none. And we all love that. And yet it's now become impossible to ignore the fact that over the years, the tide has been rising, and that tide is one of ideology.
Yeah.
And it's gradually been seeping under the door of the newsroom and filling up the broadcasting studios. And, it's sort of sloshing through its news channels online. And I think that now with the revelation of this report, we can no longer afford to let our residual fondness for the BBC look away and see it becoming an ideological instrument of the left. We've seen, since this scandal has broken, the BBC, top journalists like John Simpson, I wrote about him recently for The Telegraph, John Simpson and others, singing from exactly the same hymn sheet as the liberal media, The Guardian and The Observer, and left-wing politicians all mounting this accusation that the BBC might have made one or two innocent mistakes, but basically is being brought down by a coup, by a right-wing coup. This is tinfoil hat conspiratorial thinking. And if you compare that on the one side to the evidence, you think you can't set the evidence aside and say this is a coup. The evidence is the whole story. It's your failures. Deal with the failures and then we'll be happy. We're not against you because you're the BBC. We just want you to be impartial, which is the whole point of the licence fee in the first place.
Before the hostages were released, thank goodness, and before Trump's peace deal, Keir Starmer and the Labour government recognised a state of Palestine. How damaging was that move, Jake? And do you think that internal Labour Party politics was responsible?
I think it was hugely damaging on so many levels. It was damaging geopolitically. It was damaging to Britain's standing in the world, or what remains of Britain's standing in the world. And it was damaging to us as a nation morally and almost spiritually as well. Our sense of who we are and what we stand up for was damaged. If you wind back and recall the response from Hamas to Keir Starmer recognising a state of Palestine, these are I don't need to go over what they've done. Our listeners will know, but these are the murderers, the mutilators, the kidnappers, the necrophiliacs, the savages of October the 7th. And they were officially congratulating Britain on our foreign policy. Why? Because it worked in their favour. Keir Starmer didn't place any demands on Hamas, didn't say release the hostages first and then we'll have a recognition of you. He didn't say to the Palestinian Authority, get rid of Hamas and then we'll give you a recognition. He said, we'll give you a recognition so long as Israel stops unless Israel stops attacking you. So all the pressure was on Israel to leave Hamas in power, leave the hostages underground or else. And he marshalled the might of the British state in the services, I'm afraid, of a jihadi agenda. And then the following week, or the week after that, there were those awful murders in Manchester by an Islamist killing two Jewish people. And Keir Starmer had the gall to lament that attack while presiding over a government that has allowed this sort of Israelophobia to fester in society. I bet Hamas celebrated that Manchester attack with as much joy as they celebrated Keir Starmer's announcement of a recognition of a Palestinian state 2 weeks previously. And the heckling of David Lammy on the scene in Manchester just proved the strength of feeling against him.
Yes, there is, I've been to numerous Jewish events, and if you just mention the BBC, it's quite, as you know, Jake, Jews are a pretty polite crowd, but there is such kind of, well, I find them a respectable bunch, and there is booing mention the word name Jeremy Bowen, and you get an extraordinary reaction. And yes, and Starmer and the Labour ministers had the absolute gall, didn't they, to say that Britain had played a part in the ceasefire deal, which was just absolutely really took the biscuit.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the thing about Jew, the way I sort of laughed over, I should explain. Jewish culture, it's one where I suppose the best way of describing it is that everyone feels like family first, and you behave like you're with family all the time when you're amongst Jews, but also with non-Jews. They quickly become part of this family spirit. So there's this kind of informality. So when the food comes in, everyone pushes and grabs stuff, and people are kind of informal with each other in a way that other people aren't. And it's warm, but some people can find it, oh, hang on a minute, you're not being as polite. But when it comes to obeying the law of the land, standing up for Britain, being patriotic, knowing right from wrong, respecting other people, there's a glut of that amongst Jews, and they're super polite in that way that comes from, generally speaking, if it's possible to generalise in this way, from a moral core. And there's a certain sense of not just disgust, but betrayal, I think, amongst the Jewish community towards this Labour government, which was time and time again, Keir Starmer, in that nasal, wooden and hackneyed voice that he has asserted his supposed support for the Jewish community and his strong stance against anti-Semitism. To be fair, fair to him, in the early days, he did purge the party of anti-Semites that had festered under Corbyn, but he's then gone on through his slavish devotion to quote-unquote international law and quote-unquote human rights. All the stuff that's got us in this mess with with migration, with everything else. He declaring his support for Jews and then advancing policies which absolutely shaft us, and with us, the entire country.
We have, as you referred to, Jake, seen this horrible attack on a synagogue in Manchester. Synagogues across the country and Jewish schools are under siege. I go to a number of Jewish centres to take part in debates. By the way, I didn't mean that they were super polite. What I meant was when you mention the BBC and you get this absolute catcalling, that's quite strong, isn't it? But
it's unusual for
Jews. It is unusual.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I meant. I mean, I'm shocked by the airport levels of security that I've come across in Jewish places. Jake, you were the editor of the Jewish Chronicle from 2021 to earlier this year. What do you think the mood of British Jews is? And do you think many will shamefully end up leaving because the UK is no longer safe for them?
Well, I think that's happening already. I mean, my mum is an Orthodox Jew. She's about as British as it gets. I mean, she even makes kosher mince pies at Christmas time. But she's an Orthodox Jew. She covers her hair. She goes to synagogue. Her father fought in the D-Day landings very proudly, and he's probably the most patriotic man I've ever known. Hugely proud of that. I went with him back to Normandy some years ago before he died. Jewish, of course. And yet my mother has very few friends left because so many of her friends have moved to Israel. I mean, she's doing a pottery course, and she's doing it by herself because her friends have all moved away to Israel. And this is not just because Israel's lovely and because they want to have a nice retirement. Younger people are beginning to move as well. We are losing. Britain is losing its Jews. It's starting to happen already, and it's really a sign of the times when so many British Jews see themselves with a more secure future in a country that's been fighting a war for 2 years than in Britain. I hesitate to make any comparison between Britain and 1930s Germany. It feels hyperbolic, and it also feels rather not my place to make those comparisons. But my fellow podcaster Andrew Fox has given talks to Holocaust survivors, and they have told him that this reminds them of what they experienced in the 1930s. And who am I to argue? There's a certain complacency. Before Hitler came to power, even when Hitler came to power, there was this dominant complacency in the Jewish community where Hitler came to power and the next day people went off on their holidays. Jewish people went off on their holidays thinking it would all blow over. And that should be a lesson that is learned not just by Jews but by all of society when we see the rise of Islamism on our streets, through Parliament, the alliance between Islamism and progressive radicals in our universities, in our schools, in our government, in the corridors of Westminster, in local government, in the National Trust, in the media, in advertising. This is a ring of fire that is organised by some very well-prepared Islamists who have been working on this for generations and generations in conjunction with the useful idiots of the left. And they have a game plan. And that game plan is to overturn our democratic way of life and all the things that our grandparents or parents fought for. And we are embroiled in this or sort of sagging into this complacency. It's what the French philosopher Alexandre Kojève described as the eternal Sunday. The dimanche éternel. We're in this eternal Sunday. It's Simon Sebag Montefiore called it the comfort democracies. We're in a comfort democracy. We're not recognizing the threat as it rises and takes over. And Jews, are nothing if not a seismic people, as Victor Klemperer put it. We feel the tremors of the earthquake early. That's why we're leaving. Everybody else just hasn't begun to wake up to this yet, but they will. They will.
Well, talking about that, I think every so often a kind of a light comes on, doesn't it, in this complacency. And last week there was a football match in Birmingham between Aston Villa and Maccabi Tel Aviv. We saw a local Muslim MP campaigning for Israeli fans to be banned. There were clear threats of violence if Jews didn't stay away, Jake, it was clearly not just about a football match. And as you say, we've got these 5 independent Muslim MPs in the House of Commons who have focused on Gaza, not on their constituencies. And we also have a number of Labour ministers who are in strongly Muslim constituencies with an eye on very small majorities there. How real is this threat of Islamic sectarianism, do you think?
It's very real. It's very real. They're not in the majority by any stretch of the imagination, but history is testament to the power of the determined and fanatical minority for making history. And, I would just offer 2 ways of thinking about this before we go into it, which I go into in my book in some detail. 2 bits of science. I'm not a scientist, but 2 bits of science, neuroscience actually. One is that there was a piece of research published in April by the neuroscientists Scott Barry Kaufman and Craig Newman. It's a massive study of 75 countries and 200,000 people, huge. And what they discovered is that people growing up in the autocracies, in non-democratic countries, have a much higher preponderance of 3 traits, which they called the dark triad. And those traits are Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. And of course, the people who rise to the top of those societies have even more of a preponderance of those. Whereas people in the democracies are much more likely to display what they call the light triad of humanism, so a sort of empathy, faith in humanity, and Kantianism, which is basically not manipulating people, but seeing people with dignity in their own right and worthy of compassion. And you can see what happens when these 2 streams come together. The people from non-democratic countries with those 3 dark triad qualities, whether they turn up on rubber boats at our beaches, whether they immigrate into Britain over decades and pass that on to their children without assimilating or whatever, and the contact between them and people who've grown up in a comfort democracy who have the light triad of empathy and so on. The other piece of research is from Orla Peters, the neuropsychologist, who talked about the differences between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And cognitive empathy is possessed much more by Hamas, by people in the autocracies. And it's the ability to figure out how your opponent thinks. You don't empathize with them as a human. You just can see how their mind works and how to manipulate them. Whereas emotional empathy, which we have in the West, is I see somebody else suffering and I feel their pain, I empathize with them and I want to relieve it, whether it's fake news or not. And so you can see the contact again between people who are very skilled, overdeveloped in understanding how people think and manipulating that, and the people who are overdeveloped in feeling other people's pain. You can see what's happening. And this is very useful. These 2 ways of thinking are very useful when thinking about our response to the war in Gaza and how Hamas has manipulated our feelings then. But also what we saw in Aston Villa and throughout Parliament. I mean, we had the Islamists in Parliament and others who ran in the last election. There was an alliance between them and the street mob. Their campaigns were marked by a huge level of intimidation, violence. Their political opponents had their tyres slashed, were pursued by mobs in the street. I mean, Jonathan Ashworth, I remember, had to hide in a church, I think it was, because he was being pursued by the mob before being dumped from his seat, the former Shadow Attorney General. And so you've got this alliance of street thuggery supporting these Islamist MPs who campaign on a platform of Gaza, Gaza, and more Gaza. And then what you see when they take power, or when they come to Parliament, not power yet, but when they come to Parliament, is advancing this Gaza agenda with the rhetoric that will evoke empathy and sympathy and the language of human rights on the other side. And we saw this happening with the Aston Villa situation, where it began with a petition on the very day that the draw was announced, pretty much, or a few days later that the draw was announced. They started a petition to stop the Israeli team coming, which then developed this mob mentality, developed a security risk to the Israeli fans coming over, and then was retrospectively presented as, oh no, we're just protecting the great British public from Israeli hooliganism, Israeli war crimes, Israeli genocide, Israeli brutality. And then ordinary people were persuaded by that to think, oh yeah, you know what, they're fair enough, let's not be Islamophobic. They just want to protect us all from the Jews because out of concern for public safety. And the poll came out during that time that showed that most Britons were taken in by this, were agreed that it was only fair enough. And so you can see this stuff happening on our streets, in Parliament, throughout society, this alliance between the bitter Islamists with a very strong agenda and the useful idiots. And they're slowly moving their tanks through our lawns, whether it's in education, politics, or the media or wherever else.
Jake, I want to move on to your book, Never Again, ? How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself. It's absolutely brilliant. You know, I love this book. I gave you a quote for it. It's not about a problem for Israel and the Jews, although that's the nub of it, but it broadens out to be about Western civilization and why we so badly need to defend it. You'll be delighted to know that I found myself putting ticks in the margin like the old English teacher I am. 2 ticks occasionally.
Red pen.
A red pen. A major theme of the book is that unlike Israel, the West has stopped believing in itself. How would you explain that?
Well, I think it really boils down to the Never Again pledge, which, of course, is the title of the book, which was made to the Jews after the Holocaust, but also to the world in 1945, that we were going to never let this happen again. And that really was the point at which the West and Israel began to diverge in a certain way. Because for the Jews who then came to establish the State of Israel, the lesson they took from the Holocaust was that a strong nation state, a liberal democracy defended by an army, was indispensable if you were going to survive. And the lesson taken by the rest of the West was that a strong nation state with a strong defence, strong borders, strong social coherence, strong national pride, belief in ourselves and our history, was to be done away with if we were to ensure that Hitler wouldn't rise again. They sort of mistakenly associated the rise of fascism and Hitler with patriotism, basically. And that led to the West being dominated by an ethos which Sir Roger Scruton described as down with us, a down with us mentality, whether it's borders, history, our flag, our national pride. But the irony is that proper healthy patriotism, as we've expressed for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, is actually the bulwark against fascism. And what we've seen with this mentality, which I described in the book as centrist fundamentalism, that you can't express any pride or any of those old values anymore, or else we're going to mock you, deride you, and call you Hitler, call you fascist. Just look at the Brexit vote for that. They sort of tamped down those instincts, and in the vacuum arose a new radicalism. There was a lot of space suddenly in the place that used to be occupied by our national pride and identity. And suddenly that was occupied by progressive radicalism, Islamist radicalism, and national chauvinism, or the far right, white supremacy, which isn't really a problem in Britain so much, but much more in America, where you have actual Nazis with swastika tattoos, and in Europe. And these streams began to suck up all the stray energy left that used to go into the normal traditions and customs and morality and patriotism that we had, and begin to eat us from within. And I think that Israel, in a way, represents has more fidelity to our old values as they were expressed before the Second World War. In Israel, you find strong national pride, you find pride in the flag. You find, of course, pride in their borders, because if they had open borders, October the 7th would look like a cakewalk. And as a result, you find a strong economy, a booming economy, even during wartime. You find a very healthy demographic in Israel. Many people, the average age is much lower than here. We have a birth rate here that's not replacing the current population. In Israel, it's exceeding replacement. And as a result, you find a lot of happiness. According to international scales of happiness by the UN and others, Israel is either number 5 or number 8 happiest country in the world, behind only the Scandinavian countries. We're languishing by comparison in number 24, there or thereabouts. The Americans behind us. Italy is something like 40. And this is a country, Israel, that's been experiencing war, existential war for the last 2 years. It's still way, way happier than us. You know, I went there on holiday with my kids a couple of years ago, and my daughter, who then was about 14, said, it feels like people have a reason to live here. You know, they have the same screens as we do, the same access to social media and so on, but they have very low levels of depression, anxiety, very low levels of suicide, very low levels of crime, very low levels of drug addiction and so on. Because people actually care about each other, because they still have that family feeling that we've lost through decades of mass uncontrolled immigration and centrist fundamentalism. And so we've reached a point where we're committing slow suicide in Britain and Europe, and we're wagging our fingers at Israel, commanding them to commit quick suicide. But Israel won't do it. And ironically, we're in a position where Israel's on the up over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's the democracy of the future because it hasn't jettisoned that sense of peopleehood alongside its democratic ideals. We are on the decline in all those same metrics that Israel is thriving. We are declining. So, as you put it in your quote for my book, we need to be more Israel. We need to learn those lessons, which were our own lessons. We need to remember who we were, remember who we are. And the challenge is to restore those things without tipping into the sort of chauvinism or bigotry that might be an overcompensation, to find the real us, the real Christianity back, the real pride in our flag back, the real pride in our history back, without becoming, some sort of jingoistic sort of chauvinist. We need to find that moderation back, and that's the only thing that's going to protect us into the future.
I actually have been, since the 7th of October, been twice to Israel, often on quite sad purposes, Jake, to meet with hostage families and survivors, and indeed with interviewing Eli Sharabi, an extraordinary man who'd spent over 700 days as a prisoner, as a hostage actually in the Gaza tunnels. But as you say, I found myself thinking these are an enviable people, which is quite an odd conclusion, isn't it? When you think of the perils they face. But I think it's having had dinner with these young IDF soldiers. I mean, they by no means all fully signed up supporters of Netanyahu, but they can't afford neurosis. They can't afford suicidal empathy, because, as you say, if they have suicidal empathy for their enemies, they will be dead. I mean, we saw, didn't we, on October the 7th, a guy I met who was a reservist who had fought his way along the southern border, came to a crossroads, and he said there were all these bodies of young people, and he didn't know why they were all wearing these pretty, sparkly clothes. And of course, they'd fled, Jake, from the Nova Festival. And he said to me, that day I saw what Israel looks like when she doesn't have an army. So in a sense, it is the existential threat that makes the society wake up and appreciate what it has to defend, where here in the UK, where perhaps we are bedeviled by complacency and an unwillingness to defend our values. Do you think that's right?
Absolutely right. I mean, the stories of Israeli heroism on October the 7th are just astonishing, really astonishing. I mean, ordinary people, as Yoav Gallant, the former defence minister who was in charge on October the 7th, told me on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Ordinary people woke up in the morning, 6:30, went for a jog, had a coffee. Within an hour, they were fighting for their lives and the lives of people around them. And perhaps that second part of the sentence is the most striking, the lives of people around them. I mean, you had people
And sorry to interrupt, but Arabs, some
Yes.
Israeli Muslims showed conspicuous gallantry on that day, didn't they?
They did. And there's a lot in my book about how Muslims in Israeli society saved Jews, put their lives on the line to save Jews, supported Jews, rescued Jews, and also fight in the IDF. So yes, they're in the minority probably, but they really rallied around Israel after October the 7th. And that's a lesson for us here, that integration is possible. You just need to know who you are and insist upon them adapting to your ways and retaining their own religion and culture, but taking on the values that we love, rather than us doing our values down and sort of allowing, you know, the values and principles of rural Pakistan to run riot and overtake Britain. And, you know, Israel, I mean, that heroism on October the 7th, I mean, there was one example of an Ethiopian Jew who didn't have a car, saw what was going on October the 7th, and ran 8 miles with a gun to defend people in the south. You know, these are, you know, and interestingly enough, you know, one area in which Israel is terrible is politics. Its political system is proportional representation, which is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. It's got far-right ministers in the cabinet. It's a disaster politically. And before October the 7th, the country was divided with huge protests on the streets. The government was grinding to a halt. Left was against right. Even the pilots were refusing to fly in protest against the government. But on October the 7th, that was all forgotten. People came together and fought to defend not just their country, but their family, the wider family of their country. And I worry now about Britain that if, you know, there's no reason, you know, Vladimir Putin has missiles that could easily reach the United Kingdom. We don't have some kind of right to be free from war for eternity while we dole it out ourselves overseas or while we lecture other people on not doing it. You know, we are vulnerable too. And if the dogs of war were to start snapping at our heels, if missiles were to fall on London, on Birmingham, Manchester or wherever, would we pull together and fight in the way that the Israelis have done, and in the way that our grandparents did, and in the way that the Britons throughout history have done and would do? Can we still do that now? That question is the one that keeps me up at night above all others.
Finally, Jake, bringing us up to date, we have all of the living hostages returned from Gaza. Some of the bodies are still not recovered. There is a shaky peace in place. Israel has neutralized threats in Lebanon, Syria. Iran is much weakened, although I hear stirrings there that don't sound that great. Hamas, obviously much weakened, but still holding evil sway in Gaza and executing opponents on the street, which would surprise the BBC, still taking its instructions from the Gaza Health Ministry. Jake, what do you think Israel will do now to guarantee that October the 7th never again?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think before October the 7th, Israel had been, experiencing its own complacency. There was a concept called, unimaginatively, the concept, conceptia in Hebrew, which was that we know that our enemies are just over the border and want to kill us, but we've got the technology to put up fences, to deter them, to respond to spates of aggression with force, to deter them in that way, and also to help them. So in the years before the Gaza war that started in 2023 with October the 7th, of course, Israel had withdrawn from Gaza in 2005, but it had been allowing up to 20,000 Gazans to enter Israel from Gaza and work to earn higher wages and bring back money into the Gazan economy. It allowed money from Qatar, infamously, to be taken into Gaza to bolster the economy. And the idea was that if they're doing okay, they won't have the appetite for destroying us. We've got our fences, we've got our military, and we'll concentrate on our own economic development. I mean, in the years since Israel gave Gaza to the Palestinians in 2005, Israel's GDP and its economy doubled. You know, so huge economic growth. Huge diplomatic achievements with the signing of the Abraham Accords, with the United Arab Emirates in particular, but also other countries coming on board. So things were looking good for Israel then. But what they had done was fall into their own complacency of thinking that this was a way to solve it. You know, at that time, on October the 6th, 2023, Hezbollah had 150,000 rockets trained on Israel, which alone, if they were all unleashed, would have a good chance of destroying the state. Then you had Hamas. Then you had the Iranian regime, very close to nuclearization, and you had the Houthis and others. So if all that was unleashed at once, which Hamas hoped to happen on October the 7th, which thankfully didn't happen, Israel would really be up against it and may very well have been destroyed. But fast forward to now, a new doctrine was established on October the 7th, which was, no, from now on, we're not going to fall for it. If you're there, you say you want to kill us, you're developing the means to kill us, no matter our superiority, our military edge, we are going to take you out and ensure that that threat is neutralized. And that's been really the new compass point that Israel's been following in the 2 years since, regardless of international condemnation, insisting that Israel pulls back before achieving that objective. Because Israel understood that we've learned our lesson now. It was taught to us good and hard, and we can no longer have those threats mounting because they say they want to do October the 7th again and again. We cannot let them continue to exist in that form, continue to have power regardless of the squealing of the world. And now of course, the deal was done by Trump. Hamas is still in power to some extent, although it's a rump of its former self. Really, Israel is a place where questions are never answered, where threats are never resolved. The Iranian regime has been humiliated, still a threat. Hezbollah, as you said just before, it's been decimated and yet still wants to rebuild. Hamas, almost destroyed and yet still wants to destroy Israel. These are zombies. These are jihadi zombies. They only have one mode, which is kill, kill, kill. And Israel has always got to answer a question, answer the next question, answer the next question, which are continually posed by the satanic ingenuity of the enemy. And so the peace deal is great. Getting hostages back was great. Most of the bodies back was great. Israel is now in the most powerful position it's been since 1967 in terms of its military might anyway, if not public opinion. But these threats will never go away, and Israel's got to keep subduing them and stopping them. And that is going to be the task of the next leader after Netanyahu and all future generations.
Jake Wallis Simons, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that was Jake Wallis Simons there, author of Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself. We also had a summer of unrest in 2025 as protests outside migrant hotels intensified, with news of more attacks on women and children by undocumented men who'd crossed the channel illegally in small boats. The Bell Hotel in Epping received a lot of media coverage after the arrest of Ethiopian national Hadesh Gibatu for offences against a 14-year-old schoolgirl and another woman. Vice Chair of Epping Reform UK, Orla Minihane, was a leading figure at the Epping protests. Alison spoke to Orla following her powerful speech outside the Bell, rebutting allegations that the protesters were far right, saying they were in fact ordinary mums and dads concerned about the safety of their children. Alison began by asking Orla what had led her to getting involved in these protests.
So I knew that there had been several incidences over the past few months, and then actually previously had heard over the last couple of years that there had been an increase in crime and that there had been lots of sort of untoward behaviour from men from the hotel and towards mainly young women, young girls in the town. And it was almost sort of rumour and, people would talk about it and there would be sort of WhatsApp messages saying, have you heard this? This has happened to my daughter, etc. And then I got a phone call actually a few weeks ago from Adam Brooks, who's an independent journalist. And I know him well. I sort of grew up with him, although he's a lot younger than me. But he contacted me and said, there's an alleged sexual assault against a young girl, schoolgirl. I don't know the details. As soon as I know, I'll let you know. If you hear anything, let me know. So that's sort of how it came to pass. And we kept in contact for sort of the next 24 hours. He then contacted me and said that a guy had been charged who was an Ethiopian 38-year-old who had only been in the UK for 8 days. And he was in the Bell Hotel. And it was his third alleged assault on 3 different individuals. So he said to me, look, I'm going to go to the Bell. I'm going to do a report from the Bell. Come and meet me. So I went down and met him and we were very, very quickly escorted away. And there were security came out of the hotel and said, you need to get off the premises, etc. And a lady came out who was in a hijab from apparently a migrant integration charity of some sort. And she was really aggressive and really rude. And we said, look, we just want to know what's happening because we're doing a report. We don't know the details either way. We want to give a fair sort of description or, overview of what's happened. Can you help us? She shooed us away and said that we had no reason to be there. We had no right to be there and we were troublemaking. That was that. I think that was on the Tuesday. And then the first demonstration was on the following Sunday. Now, what happened in between is Adam reported on it.
So let's just confirm, Orla, Adam, Essex publican, wonderful guy, been a former guest on Planet Normal and also regular GB News presenter who has been covering the Bell story with you, obviously very prominently as well.
Yes, absolutely. And he's just very well known locally and has a lot of following, has a big following. So he sort of publicised what had happened, said, that we don't know the details, but this is what's happening. So, if you see some cameras or you see police, etc., this is what's going on locally. And it was just reported on local WhatsApp groups, etc. Then it turned out that the guy was following or was going to appear in Chelmsford a week after. That Sunday, we got word that there had been almost sort of a word of mouth that there was going to be a protest outside the Bell and that we should, as many people as possible should go. And it was scheduled for 6:00 and people were texting each other saying, should we go? And then we got there and the support was unbelievable. But it was very much a off-the-cuff, very local word of mouth community. None of this, this nonsense about how it's been arranged by the far right on Facebook and, Vanguard, whoever they are, I don't know, and the Homeland Party. And it's absolute nonsense. It was word of mouth spread around by people. Let's go down there and show that we're in solidarity for the family of the girl that was abused. And we have had enough, that we've now got to, this is the straw that's almost broken the camel's back.
Yeah. Can we just confirm, Orla? So this guy, the alleged sexual assaulter, an Ethiopian called Hadush Kebatu, who had got off a small boat, crossed the channel, and a mere 8 days later was accused of this sexual assault on a 14-year-old girl. Now, Orla, you said that in previous years, the Bell had been used. There had been migrant families there. But that last year it seemed that almost overnight about 100 undocumented young males had turned up. Do you think things changed then? You were talking about female safety. You work in the city. Was there more alarm with women coming back late at night from jobs and so on?
Yeah, so I think I'm sure they probably weren't, but it seemed that they were almost brought in the sort of the dark of night. It was all very cloak and dagger. It was never publicised. There was no public consultation. And it was very much sort of, let's bring them in, around the back of the hotel. And then people started noticing that there were these groups of men loitering around the town centre, walking around, hanging out, always sort of smoking outside the shops or sitting in the forest on, drinking. And everybody started to sort of become quite alarmed. Women, and again, a lot of women in the area do work, that we're a lot of professional women. So they were coming home from work, coming off the tube, feeling uncomfortable walking home, especially because this was really sort of came to pass just after Christmas and New Year. So it's obviously dark. And they were ringing their husbands, can you come and pick me up? I just don't feel comfortable. So there's all this sort of slight social, sort of like an atmosphere of everyone's not feeling very comfortable. And then we started hearing stories about shoplifting and going into Marks and Spencer's or Tesco in the town, walking in, these guys picking things up, walking out, totally unchallenged. People just started to be very uneasy about the atmosphere and the fact that these guys were hanging around, not speaking English, appearing quite, people quite, not aggressive is probably the wrong word, but intimidating.
Glaring.
Yeah. And so people started to there was a bit of unrest. I think it was March time, there was a council meeting. The council offices are right in the middle of town, in Epping town. And there was a council meeting. And in that meeting, several locals were in the gallery, and the meeting completely avoided talking about the bell, even though the locals had requested that there was a discussion around the migrants in the Bell Hotel. It was completely ignored. Towards the end of the meeting, a couple of people sort of shouted out, "We want to talk about the bell," from the gallery, and they were all removed by security. So then, of course, people are saying, well, why aren't we being consulted on this? Why aren't we allowed to talk about this? So therefore, if you conceal the truth or discussion, then it's going to get people even more irate. As the sort of the summer months come in, more girls and people are walking home, and that's when these guys started sort of hanging around in the evenings. Talks or discussions were had around, on Facebook and WhatsApp groups. I went jogging this evening and I was sort of accosted almost by a group of young men, or I was walking my dog. I can't do that anymore over on the common because I just don't feel safe. So that's when it started to become more apparent that there was a lot of scared, mainly women, who are just getting to a point where they thought, this is not fair. Why am I being compromised in this way?
Yeah, you don't want those people there. You told me that there was one mother who approached the police with a complaint and was told, watch what you're saying. You know what happened to Lucy Connolly after the Southport riots. Does that strike you as being outrageous?
Oh, absolutely outrageous. So there are two hotels. There's the Bell Hotel, and there's one called the Phoenix Hotel. The Phoenix Hotel is slightly further out in Ongar, but still in the Epping Forest borough or area. And two ladies, one said that her daughter was walking home from school. She was approached by a man from the Phoenix Hotel who was vile and saying vile things to her, kept trying to grab her. She ran home, spoke to her mum. She went to the police, and they said, you need to be very careful what you accuse people of doing. Remember what happened to Lucy Connolly, quote unquote. She then, single mum, has 4 daughters, terrified, thinks, what do I do? Will I go to prison? Will I be locked up for accusing, she didn't publicise it anywhere. She wanted to put it on a WhatsApp group.
She was intimidated.
She was intimidated because she said, what happens to the girls if I get, locked up?
Don't you think, Orla, that, obviously this is now happening. We're seeing it happening in many other migrant hotels nationwide. And of course, we are this week marking the year of the Southport massacre and Lucy Connolly's tweet, where she's still in prison for that tweet. Yeah. Does it feel to you like these men are being brought in cloak and dagger, as you say, suddenly, and that it is the native population whose reaction to that being done to them is criminalised, is called into account? Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, if we look at what's happened in Epping and we look at the riots, as they call them, they weren't riots. They were just very angry locals that were angry with the police because of the fact that the police escorted the lefties in. So, there was an anger about the fact that we are demonstrating because we're angry and upset with the fact that these men have been put right in the middle of our town, surrounded
near schools.
Right. So there's anger around that. But what we're finding is, the attack from the far left or from these anti-racist groups attacking us, calling us racist, calling us, fascist, calling us Nazis, so we're sort of being marginalised and made to feel that we are criminals when all we are doing is saying we want to be safe. We're taxpayers. Let's remember that. We are everybody that I am standing shoulder to shoulder with in these demonstrations are all hardworking, tax-paying people. A guy said to me the other day, I work 6 days a week. I'm being crucified with tax. I've got 3 little girls, and all I want is for them to be safe. That's all I want. And I am being accused. I'm worried about losing business. I'm worried about losing, customers, because I feared I'm going to be targeted and labelled as far right, which is so far from the truth. I just want to live in a safe environment, and my children live in a safe environment. So we're being demonised because we're not throwing our arms open and saying, please come into our country. Please come here when we have no idea who you are and where you've come from and what your background is. Please come here because you're, fleeing war and, the terror of your own, your own culture. Well, if it's so terrible, why are you leaving your wife and children? Why are you coming here en masse, all male, and sit pitching up in hotels and getting 3 meals a day and living your best life when you're leaving your wife and children and your mother behind if it's so bad? It's nonsense.
I think what you said to me, that you'd said to some of the police, if there were hundreds of you like there are here down at Dover, then we wouldn't be having that problem. Orla, you couldn't go up further in my estimation. But one of the things I really appreciated about these protests, which are happening twice a week outside the Bell, is that you're there with dads and mums and children with very homemade posters. Yeah. We're not far right, in very striking contrast to these stand up to racism protesters who look to me like they've got professional placards and also looked very beefy and as if they just weren't normal members of the public. Who do you think they are?
So I think there's a mix. I think that the first night, a couple of Thursdays ago, where there was the trouble and the police escorted them in, there's photo evidence of very sort of strong, strapping men, face masks, hats on and glasses, looking very, very suspiciously like either undercover police or sort of like ex-army kind of men.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, marching, not the, the stereotypical lefties where they look, slightly untoward, but very, very much they were coming to aggravate and to cause trouble, no mistake. On Sunday just gone, there were hundreds of people from the anti-racist demonstration, and they were a mix. They were a real mix of people. But as you say, there are photos and there's videos that I've been sent of a white van outside Epping Station handing out posters and placards that have been printed saying Epping are far right, Epping are racist, etc. That takes a lot of preparation and a lot of mobilising to get. We've got a lot of support in Epping, but we've got kids like Blue Peter style, making posters. So who is making these posters and these placards?
It's clear that they are deliberately there to discredit the ordinary mums and dads and indeed to try and pick a fight so then the news can call it a riot. That would be Can we just talk very briefly about this? What was the role of Essex Police? Because there was great controversy. Initially, Essex Police said they hadn't escorted the counter-protesters, but then later on they changed their story.
They absolutely did, and they did so on Sunday as well. So that first night, we were outside the Bell. We were all very peaceful, unbelievable amounts of police. And to your earlier point, I said, if you had this many police from 5 constabularies on the shores of Dover, we would not have this issue. Strange that you can mobilise everybody for a little protest in Epping. But anyway, so we were all standing, and then there was word that these lefties, if you like, that's what everyone calls them, were coming on the tube into Epping Station. There were people that were on the tube who sort of texted and said they're on their way. The police met them and then walked them from, bearing in mind that these people don't know Epping. So if you don't know Epping, you don't know how to get, you wouldn't really necessarily know how to get from the station to where the protest was, because the Bell Hotel's on the fringes of the town. So they were escorted down, they were walked up.
By the police
to us. Now, bearing in mind that, as we've just discussed, some of these protesters were wearing masks and glasses. Their faces were covered. So you are escorting masked protesters to meet another protest, a pro and a for. Would you do that? My question would be, and I said it on the night, if that was a pro-Palestine march, would you escort what would be called right-wing masked protesters to meet them? No, you wouldn't, because you know that there's going to be trouble. And it was almost as if that is what they were trying to do. And they marched them straight into each other. When it got a little bit hairy and people started to get a little bit, it started to get a little bit uncomfortable. And what I would describe as the professional protesters, but the rest of them, very, very quickly dispersed. The police vans pulled up the meat wagons and put them all in.
Wow.
And then drove them all the way back to the station so they could go home. What on earth went on there? And I don't care how many times they deny it. We've got it on video. We watched it with our own eyes.
I've also seen online one of the protesters, one of these guys at Epping, then clearly the same guy with the same placard at another protest in another location. So they are professional.
They are professional agitators.
Agitators,
That's exactly what they are. Absolutely.
Orla, can I ask you, do you think the British state is frightened of the anger amongst ordinary British families?
Do you know what I think? I honestly believe that the government have no idea what to do. I don't think they have any idea what to do. I don't think that they have any idea how to clean up the mess. I don't think that they know what to do with the people that are here. They just seem so out of control. And the only way that they feel that they can get control is by that, sort of demonizing the people that they see as the enemy. And the irony is that they think they see the enemy as the everyday, peaceful, working class, middle class, white family. And that is the truth of it. And also back to that, I said to somebody the other day, if these stand up to racism protesters, if it is a real stand up to racism, why are there no black or Asian people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we could talk a lot about the left and their behaviour. Now, Epping is, I guess you could see a lot like your own family. You were born in Tottenham, your family moved out for a better life. It's a lot of EastEnders who kind of called white flight in a way, because obviously the East End is no longer the sort of Cockney stronghold it once was. Do you think there's a feeling amongst people in Epping that this is our England? We're not gonna have that carry on again.
Do you know what? I honestly don't think so. I honestly, hand on heart, do not think that the people that are demonstrating against these migrant hotels and the influx of undocumented, I don't think they're racist at all. The East End, or I don't think they've got an issue with multiculturalism. I think that they just want to be respected and live in peace. I mean, the amount of people that will say to you that they grew up in the East End of the 70s and 80s, they had an Indian family downstairs and a Jamaican family next door. And there was a guy, someone said to me, we had a guy upstairs that was a Rastafarian and we always used to go up there and chat to him. And, East London has always been a melting pot of cultures, loads of Jewish community, Bangladeshi from like the 80s. It was very Bangladeshi in Whitechapel. Nobody has ever had an issue because there's been mutual respect. And people have, you look at Brick Lane. Brick Lane's famous for, a bagel shop and Indian restaurants. There's never been an issue. The problem is that we're seeing that people aren't willing to live side by side and respect each other. It's being forced upon you, and you're being marginalised as a culture. And, this nonsense of we can't wear a Union Jack, we can't celebrate St. George's Day, we can't, you can't say that you're Christian, you can't. That's what people are annoyed about. Don't demonise and undermine our culture and replace it with another one. Let us live side by side and let's all, get on and respect each other. And I think that we're a very, very tolerant nation of people. And honestly, and I think that's why people get so angry when they're called fascists and right wing, because it's not true. It just really is not true.
Let's just come right up to date now. I understand that Epping Council voted to close the Bell Hotel and that this is now with the Home Office. Are the protests going to continue until it's closed? And what are your fears that if they close it, where are they going to put all those men?
That's my biggest fear. And I said this, I was interviewed the other day and I said this very thing. For us, brilliant, the Bell Hotel gets closed down, whatever happens, it becomes a hotel again or, flats or whatever. And that's great for Epping. But those men are going to be moved to either HMOs within Epping, which is worse, I think, because they're going to be then dispersed amongst, the community, or they get moved to another hotel and become another town's problem and another child, a risk to another child. So, it just can't go on. It's not sustainable. So whilst we can't back down because we have committed to the fact that we want Epping to be safer, our community want these guys out, they want the hotel shut down. My view personally is that I feel sad that they're going to go somewhere else and become another problem for another town.
We are having, obviously it's good weather. We are having over 500 of these, mainly men from, to my mind, quite anti-women, backward cultures landing on our shores every single day. And do you have a feeling that we are coming now to a crisis point? There are over 200 migrant hotels in England and Wales, many of them, as you say, Orla, dealt with in great secrecy. What if you were in government? Let's hope that happens one day. If you were in government, what would you do about those men?
I would deport them because, look, the thing is, what we're doing is, it's like you've got a crack in your ceiling and there's water pouring in, and rather than filling that crack in, they're pouring buckets of water into it, and it's becoming. I just don't understand where they're coming from. You can't deal with who you've got here. It's out of control, but you're still letting them come in. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But my view would be, if it was down to me, I would deport them all. I would, and then say to them, if you have a real case for asylum and you really are fleeing, you are really an asylum seeker, then apply the proper way. Make it, put the right administration in place, the right infrastructure in place to manage these people's asylum. But most of them, 95%, are not asylum seekers. They're economic migrants, or they're just people that think, I fancy an all-inclusive holiday at the cost of the British taxpayer. But people go, well, where are they going to go because they haven't got their passports? I always find it bizarre that they can get off a boat with no passport, but they've always got a packet of cigarettes and a phone, which I find bizarre. And, my view would be, you put on it's quite extreme, but every week you have a plane to Sudan, Eritrea, Nigeria, everywhere. And you say, you get on one of those planes and you are off. If you've got the will to stop it and you want to stop it in government, you will stop it. The fundamental point is they do not want to stop it. And I don't understand what the end goal is. I just don't understand.
Orla, you've been through the screening for Reform candidates. What inspired you to join Reform?
Several things. I think that I'd always previously been a Conservative voter. I think Conservative have lost their way. I think that they are liberal at best. And I would never vote Labour because Labour have completely lost their way. So I think politics has lost its way in this country totally. And Reform, whether or not you're a fan of Nigel's or you're not, I think that's irrelevant. I think that the movement of Reform is to protect the people of this country, regardless of your ethnic background, the tax-paying people. I think that our economy is in the gutter. We used to be an unbelievable strength in money markets, and our economy was, one of the top economies in the world. Now we're just not the powerhouse we used to be. We're paying more tax than we've ever paid before. The infrastructure of this country is collapsing. You can't get a basic GP appointment. Our pensioners are freezing to death. Everything is wrong. And everything is, as Margaret Thatcher said, the only thing with socialism is that you run out of other people's money. And that is exactly what is happening. And at some point, the tax-paying public aren't going to be paying anymore. And there are going to be more people claiming than there is paying in the Treasury. And then what happens? Then we just become a bankrupt mess of a country. So for me, Reform is the only political party that has got any direction or any chance of saving us. Finally,
you said at one of the protests you came across Pat and John, an elderly couple.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So Pat and John, Pat has been there for every demonstration she's been there. And she always comes over to me and says, "Are we going to march down the road?" And I say to her, "Calm down, Pat."
How old is Pat, Orla?
She's 89.
89.
And she's a real old school East End, hard as nails. You know, she'll probably be here in another 20 years.
Yeah.
And then she brought her husband John out, who's 92.
How old's John?
92. He came with her on Sunday. And I said, he's another long suffering husband.
Yes.
And they said to me, you know, we've got great grandchildren. So we've got great granddaughters. And we moved from the East End here, I think it was like 50 or 60 years ago. Our children went to school here. We've lived here all our lives. We cannot sit at home and watch and not be part of these demonstrations, because we just feel that everything we've worked for our whole lives is, you know, being flushed down the toilet. And we're not going to, you know, she said to me, even though I'm an old lady, I still want my voice to be heard. And I said to her, you know what, Pat? And we held hands, and the week before she brought her friend with her who was in a wheelchair, and we pushed her down to the council offices in the rain. These are the people, the backbone of this country. These are the people that have worked their whole lives and paid into the public purse. And they're looking, thinking, we've brought a family up and we've got grandchildren and now great-grandchildren, and we're scared that we're going to leave, we're going to pass away, and these girls are going to be left in a country we don't recognise. You know, for them, it's probably terrifying. And I just think, you know, I'm not far behind them age-wise, but, you know, I've got a few years left of me yet. And I think if we can fight to you know, save the community and save our children and especially our young girls from, you know, this awful mentality that some of these men have and the misogynistic way that they treat women, then that's what we've got to do. Because if we don't try, then we have failed our daughters.
Orla Minihane, we saw the lionesses triumphing this week. I think you're a lioness for Epping. Thank you very much for appearing on Planet Normal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on this latest edition of Planet Normal. We'll have another selection of this year's best of interviews next week. Alison and I will be back with the very latest news and views from beyond the bubble on Thursday the 22nd of January. In the meantime, keep the emails rolling in to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Planet Normal, we jolly well hope you have, please subscribe and leave a review and a rating wherever you listen.
And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of Planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers Cass Ho, James Hodgson and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.